Archaeologists think they might have found the real Noah's Ark. The Noah's Ark soil samples from the top to highest peaks in Turkey reveal human activity and marine materials. The boat-shaped site may hold the ruins of the legendary Noah's Ark.
For decades, we have been told Noah's Ark is a myth, a fairy tale, case closed. But a team of researchers just pulled soil samples from a massive boat-shaped formation buried in the mountains of eastern Turkey. And the results did not match anything in the surrounding landscape. The organic material inside this structure is nearly 3 times higher than the ground outside it. The potassium levels are 40% elevated. The pH is shifted. The carbon content is almost triple. Something enormous made of wood decayed right here, thousands of years ago, and it sits exactly where the Bible said it would. But here is the part nobody expected. They did not just find traces of ancient wood, they found hallways. They found rooms. They found 3 separate underground levels. And they found pottery from the exact era the Bible describes. This is the story of what is buried inside that mountain and why science is no longer laughing. The shape in the photograph. To understand what is happening in eastern Turkey right now, we need to go back to September 11th, 1959. A Turkish military pilot named Captain İlhan Durupinar was flying a routine mapping mission over the mountains of eastern Anatolia. He was not looking for anything special. He was not an archaeologist or a treasure hunter. He was a surveying engineer photographing terrain along the Iranian border for standard military records. His camera clicked automatically as the plane banked over the rugged slopes south of Mount Ararat, Turkey's tallest peak at over 16,000 feet, a mountain that has sat at the center of one of the oldest legends in human history for thousands of years. When Captain Durupinar developed the photographs back at base, something in one of the frames made him stop cold. There was a shape on the hillside, not a random shadow, not a trick of the light, a massive, perfectly symmetrical, boat-shaped outline sitting at nearly 6,500 feet above sea level. It was enormous, over 500 feet long. To put that in perspective, that is longer than a football field and a half, longer than the Statue of Liberty laid on its side, and it had absolutely no business being there. Nature does not carve perfect boat shapes into volcanic rock at that altitude. Mountains do not produce symmetry like this on their own. The outline was too clean, too deliberate, too large to ignore. Captain Durupinar flagged the photograph and sent it up the chain of command. Eventually, it was published in a magazine. The world took notice for a brief moment. Then it moved on. Over the next few decades, a handful of expeditions visited the site. Some researchers looked at the formation and called it a geological fluke, a fold in the rock created by tectonic pressure over millions of years, nothing more than a coincidence. Others stood at the edge of the formation. It looked down at the perfect boat-shaped outline stretching 500 feet across the Turkish hillside and felt a chill run down their spine. Something about it did not feel natural, but feelings are not evidence, and nobody could prove what it actually was. The technology simply was not good enough. You could stare at the formation all day long, take 1,000 photographs, argue until the sun went down. But the mountain kept its secret. Then, 6 decades after Captain Durupinar snapped that photograph, everything changed, seeing through the earth. In 2019, a researcher named Andrew Jones brought a piece of technology to the site that Captain Durupinar could never have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. Think of it as an X-ray machine for the Earth. It sends electromagnetic pulses down into the soil. When those pulses hit something solid underneath, a buried wall, an artifact, a hidden room, they bounce back to a receiver on the surface and create a detailed image of what is hiding below. No digging required. No destruction of the site. Just pure data from invisible waves. Jones partnered with a company called Topa 3D, a professional geophysical scanning firm based in Oregon. These were not believers or treasure hunters. They were neutral engineers who scanned the ground for construction projects and geological surveys. They had never even heard of the Durupinar site before they arrived. They had no agenda. They just ran the equipment. The team dragged the radar unit across the entire formation in a careful grid pattern, back and forth, line by line, inch by inch. The equipment hummed and clicked as it fired invisible waves deep into the Turkish soil. The data streamed onto a laptop screen in real time, building a picture of what was underneath the surface. When the full scan was compiled back at the research tent, the room went quiet. The screen did not show random rocks or natural cave formations. It showed parallel lines, right angles, rectangular shapes arranged in patterns that looked unmistakably like rooms, like corridors, like the internal skeleton of a massive vessel buried under centuries of volcanic mud flow. The team identified what appeared to be a 43-foot tunnel running straight through the center of the formation. Not a natural crack in the rock, not a sinkhole or an underground stream, a carved angular passageway large enough for a person to walk through. Around it, the scans revealed side corridors branching off at right angles. Compartment-like structures, open spaces at regular intervals. But here is where it gets really strange. The scans showed 3 distinct layers underground, 3 separate levels stacked on top of each other, one above the next. Now open your Bible to Genesis chapter 6, verse 16. It reads, "Make it with lower, second, and third decks." 3 levels. That is what the Bible specifies for the construction of Noah's Ark. And that is exactly what the radar was seeing beneath the surface of this mountain in eastern Turkey. Not 2 layers, not 4. 3. Even the neutral operators from Topa 3D admitted the results were highly unusual. The parallel lines and angular shapes they detected are strong indicators of man-made construction. Shippo, that is not an opinion from a religious believer. That is a professional assessment from engineers who look at underground scans for a living. Andrew Jones looked at the compiled data and said something that stopped the room cold. He said the presence of hallways and room-like structures points to a man-made origin for the boat shape. He said, "These are not random shapes in the mud flow." He said it with the calm certainty of a man who had been studying this site since he was in middle school. He had moved to Turkey just to be closer to the formation, and now, for the first time, the data was backing up what he had spent decades believing, but the radar data was not even the most disturbing part of what they would eventually uncover. The chemical ghost. In September 2024, the team returned to the site with a different mission. This time, they were not scanning, they were sampling. Soil scientist William Crabtree led the operation. They collected soil from 22 different locations in and around the formation. They bagged each sample carefully, inside the boat shape, outside the boat shape, along the edges, at the pointed tip, at the wide center, a few feet outside the outline. Further away on the open hillside, every sample labeled and sealed. Then they shipped them all to a laboratory and waited for the results. When the numbers came back, William Crabtree sat with the data for a long time. When the organic matter inside the formation was double what they found in the soil, just a few feet outside the outline. Not a slight elevation, double. The potassium levels inside were 40% higher. The total carbon content registered at 2.72 times greater inside the boat shape compared to the immediate surrounding area. The pH readings inside were measurably different from the volcanic mud flow outside. Now, if you are not a soil scientist, let me explain why those numbers sent a shockwave through the team. When wood rots, it does not just disappear into thin air. It breaks down slowly into the earth over centuries. As it decomposes, it changes the chemistry of the soil around it in very specific, measurable ways. It raises the organic matter content. It increases potassium levels. It shifts the pH toward acidity. It floods the surrounding dirt with carbon. And these chemical changes can persist in the ground for thousands of years, long after the last splinter of wood has turned to dust. The wood vanishes, but its chemical fingerprint remains. William Crabtree put it in plain terms. He said, "If this was a wooden vessel and the wood had rotted over time, we would expect to see increased potassium levels, changes in pH, and higher organic content. And that is exactly what we find." Think about that for a moment. They are standing on a mountain in eastern Turkey, 6,500 feet in the air. In a region made entirely of volcanic rock and ancient mud flow, there is no forest here. There are no fallen trees. There is no natural explanation for why the soil chemistry inside a boat-shaped outline would be radically different from the soil 3 feet outside it. Unless something massive, something made of wood, something the size of a ship, decayed right where they are standing. The chemical ghost of something enormous is still in the ground. You cannot see it with your eyes, but the chemistry does not lie. And then came the discovery that shook the entire investigation wide open, the pottery that rewrote the timeline. In late December 2025, construction workers were building a new road near the Durupinar Formation. Routine infrastructure work. Nothing unusual. But as the machinery cut into the hillside, the workers hit something hard in the dirt. They pulled out fragments, broken pieces of ceramic, ancient pottery shards cracked and weathered by thousands of years underground. Professor Farooq Kaya from Agri Ibrahim Sechan University, who serves as vice-rector of the university and has led major archaeological research projects in the region, rushed to examine the fragments. What he found changed the trajectory of the entire investigation. The pottery dated to the Chalcolithic period, that is roughly 5,500 to 3,000 BC. The fragments were between 5,000 and 7,000 years old. Let that sink in. This is not pottery from the Middle Ages, not from the Roman Empire, not from the Ottoman era, not from any recent civilization. This is from the exact window of time that biblical scholars and historians associate with the story of Noah. Professor Kaya said it himself. He said this period roughly coincides with the time in which Noah is believed to have lived. So these ceramic fragments represent the first concrete physical evidence of human habitation at this specific site during the correct historical period. Somebody was here. Somebody was making pottery here. Somebody was living and working and eating and building right next to a 500-foot boat-shaped formation that matches the biblical dimensions of the ark. And they were doing it during the exact centuries that the Bible describes. Now here is the part that keeps researchers up at night. The numbers that match. The formation measures 515 feet long. The Bible says Noah's Ark was 300 cubits long. If you use the Royal Egyptian cubit, which is the measurement system scholars believe Moses would have used when writing the book of Genesis, 300 royal cubits converts to approximately 515 feet. The match is not approximate. It is not in the ballpark. It is exact. The width and height proportions follow the same biblical ratio. Andrew Jones pointed this out on national television. He told News Nation, "We have a shape of a ship, and then you look at the size of it, exactly 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. That is what Moses wrote in the book of Genesis." He was not speculating, he was measuring, and the tape measure agreed with the scripture. And there's one more detail that nobody has been able to explain away. The grass. Every autumn, as the temperatures drop in eastern Turkey, the grass growing inside the boat-shaped formation changes color. It turns lighter, more yellow, while the grass on the hillside just a few feet outside the formation stays dark green. This has been observed for years. Researchers believe this happens because there are still hollow cavities underneath the formation. Empty spaces where rooms or corridors once existed. The different soil chemistry created by the decayed wood, combined with the air pockets and voids below, is creating a completely different growing environment for the plants above. So you can literally see the outline of the buried structure by looking at the color of the vegetation. It shows up in drone footage. It shows up in satellite images. The shape of whatever is buried down there is written in the grass itself. The earth is drawing you a map. And it has been drawing it every single autumn for as long as anyone can remember. The skeptics. Now, it is important to be honest about the other side of this debate. Because this would not be good science if we ignored the critics. Geologist Lawrence Collins has studied the site and argued the formation is entirely natural. He says it is a fold in the rock created by tectonic forces over millions of years. He points out that limonite, the mineral the formation is made of, can create unusual shapes under geological pressure. British archaeologist Mike Pitt has questioned the entire flood narrative. He has said that a flood capable of lifting a massive ship 2.5 miles up a mountainside 4,800 years ago would have left enormous geological evidence across the entire planet. And we do not see that evidence. Nicholas Purcell from Oxford University has been even more blunt. He has called the claims nonsense, pointing out that Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations were flourishing during the supposed flood period, with absolutely no mention of a global deluge in their records. These are serious scientific objections from credentialed professionals. They deserve to be heard. But the Noah's Ark Scans research team fires back with a straightforward argument. They say their critics have not visited the site in person. They have not examined the new GPR data or reviewed the soil chemistry reports. The team points to the radar corridors, the three-layer structure, the chemical fingerprint of ancient wood, the pottery from the correct era, the exact dimensional match, wiring the grass anomaly as a body of evidence that is growing heavier with every expedition. Too heavy, they argue, to wave away with a single dismissive word from an office thousands of miles away. The oldest memory on Earth. And then there are the theories that push even further beyond the mainstream. This is where things get fascinating. Here is a fact that most people do not know. The story of a great flood is not unique to the Bible. It is not unique to Christianity or Judaism or Islam. The flood narrative appears in over 200 different cultures across every continent on Earth. The ancient Sumerians wrote about a catastrophic flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest pieces of literature in human history, written over 1,000 years before Genesis. In Hinduism, the story of Manu describes a righteous man warned by a fish god to build a boat before the waters rise. The ancient Greeks had Deucalion, who survived a flood sent by Zeus. The Hopi people of North America speak of a world destroyed by water. The Ojibwe have a flood story. The Aboriginal Australians have one. The Chinese have one. The Maya have one. Over 200 cultures, separated by oceans, separated by thousands of years, with no possible way to communicate with each other, and they all tell the same story. A world drowned, a few survivors, a vessel, a new beginning. What if they are all remembering the same event? Then some geologists and climate scientists believe that at the end of the last ice age, roughly 9,000 to 12,000 years ago, catastrophic glacial melt caused global sea levels to rise by over 400 feet. Entire coastlines that had been dry land for millennia vanished beneath the waves. Communities that had thrived along the shores for generations were swallowed by the ocean. And the Black Sea, which sits not far from Mount Ararat, may have experienced one of the most violent flooding events in human history. The theory goes like this. Before the flood, the Black Sea was a smaller freshwater lake surrounded by farming communities. Then the Mediterranean Sea, swollen by glacial melt, broke through the narrow Bosporus Strait with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. Salt water poured in at an unimaginable rate. The lake level rose by several feet per day. Entire villages were underwater within weeks. The people who survived had to run. They scattered in every direction, carrying with them the memory of the day the water came without warning and swallowed their world. If a master shipbuilder in that region had the foresight or the divine warning to construct a massive vessel before the waters arrived, and if that vessel eventually came to rest high in the mountains as the floodwaters slowly receded over months, the story would have been carried forward by every surviving culture that witnessed it. Not as a fairy tale, not as metaphor, as memory. The oldest and most traumatic memory humanity has, passed down through 100 generations in 100 different languages on 100 different continents, all pointing back to the same catastrophic event. What comes next? The Noah's Ark Scans team is now planning core drilling operations for 2026. So they want to punch through the surface of the formation and extract physical material from the corridors and rooms the radar has already detected. If they recover preserved wood from a man-made structure dating to 3000 BC or earlier, it would become the single most significant archaeological discovery in human history, not just for believers, for everyone. It would mean that one of the oldest stories ever written by human hands was not a story at all. It was a record. City Kinkuris, a warning from our ancestors that we dismissed as fantasy for 2,000 years. We have spent centuries searching for proof of the Ark. Explorers have climbed Mount Ararat in deadly blizzards. Satellites have scanned the frozen slopes from orbit. Treasure hunters have poured fortunes into expeditions and come home empty-handed. Generation after generation, the mountain has refused to give up its secret. But for the first time in all those centuries, the evidence is not coming from faith alone. Why, the radar is showing rooms, the soil is showing ancient wood, the pottery is from the right era, the dimensions are exact. The grass is drawing the outline every autumn for anyone willing to look, and the 200 flood stories from 200 different cultures are all whispering the same thing. Whatever is buried in that mountain in eastern Turkey, it is not random, it is not natural, and it has been waiting to be found for a very, very long time. Do you think the evidence is finally strong enough to prove the Ark was real, or is this another dead end in a search that has lasted thousands of years? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe. You do not want to miss what they pull out of that mountain next.